Hello, Internet. My name is Chamomile.
And I'm Requiem. And Chamomile and I are not currently engaged in some sort of love triangle, as far as I know.
That was my understanding too, but I am now filled with dread. Uh, Hypothetically, if we were, who would the third person be?
I don't know. Presumably some sort of vampire, and presumably not Fang Requiem, because that would raise some difficult questions.
Yeah, like I don't know how that would. What with him being your brother and all that.
Do we know any other vampires, though?
Not personally. I mean, if
Because we
our
could
viewer is a
call,
vampire, though,
they should let us know.
yeah, like I'm pretty big on vampires myself. I'm, just saying. Okay, you know what the first
I
side
am
quest of
I'm
Palooza I want to do here?
I'm really into love triangles.
You do seem to be. So I'm gonna go head back into that beach house and see if I can find Mercurio's money. I guess I'm just keeping it because I forgot about it while I was there, and so I had when I met him to give him the astrolite, I had to say, "Oh hey, I didn't get your money." Maybe I can
in
still get the XP for it just for stealing it though. That usually works. Although sometimes they make you choose between money or XP.
in a Pathfinder game that Chamomile ran, my character would use her magic to create love triangles out of the
Yes,
NPCs because she was a Fae and she thought that mortals basically existed to be characters in a story that she was writing.
which was like 80% of the way to being accurate in a fourth wall breaking kind of way. Which, the character was not run in like a fourth wall breaking meta kind of way like that, but it did just kind of turn out that way.
I
Okay,
think
everyone here is still
last
dead, right?
time, so last time we were talking about Twilight, and we were going to talk about my Twilight revision.
Oh
So
yeah,
So you need a reason for a vampire to have to be in a high school because high school sucks, and why would you purposely choose to be in high school? So
right.
first thing you're going to want to get into is the type of child vampire you have. So obviously you have a vampire who is was turned when they were a teenager, and with vampires who were turned when they were children, there's two ways you can go. You can go that they mentally grow and are adults in the bodies of a child, which is what Anne Rice does in Interview with Claudia. Claudia's like 8 when she's turned, and she has the mind of a fully grown woman, and part of her tragedy is that she's a fully grown woman trapped in the child of a body. But you could also do something where your brain state is essentially stuck at whatever age you were turned. So you could have somebody who is turned when they're 15, 16, and is going to be essentially in personality a 15, 16-year old for the rest of eternity. And a vampire like that could get rejected by like wider vampire society. They don't want to deal with a perpetual teenager for the rest of time. So a vampire like that cannot find peers among vampire society because that's not their peers. The guy who was turned when he was 25 or 30 or whatever is still going to view him as a 16-year-old because he's still a 16-year-old for the rest of eternity. So the only place he can find peers is at a high school. So you have your Edward character. He's turned when he's 16, 15. He's always going to be a 16, 15-year-old, not just in body, but in mind. So if he wants, like, peers, friends, whatever, he has to turn to teenagers because that's the only group of people who are at. He's stuck at that mental level forever, and he's constantly losing that peer group because they age and he doesn't.
Yeah,
So the reason he goes to
this is already way more interesting than Twilight.
yeah. so probably like so you have this character. He's turned when he's 16, 15. Uh, Vampire Society is well off. Like there's a vampire conspiracy, and probably he's got like a stipend, and he can travel from city to city and hide out at high school. And U.S. public schools, the amount of like vetting on children, like the school needs to confirm where they live for school districting terms, but unless there's like an indication of neglect, they're not necessarily going to like do a deep dive investigation. So he can probably do that because like schools aren't going to do a huge amount of investigation on the children because it's in the best interest of society if children are able to get an education regardless of their circumstances. So school will say something if there's signs of neglect or if there's like indications that they're outside of the school district, but otherwise they're not going to be investigating why does this child not have any parents if they don't seem neglected. I feel like I'm getting on a little bit. I realize I'm getting a little bit on a tangent, but I have knowledge of this, so I feel like I have to explain how it works.
Well, yeah, I mean, a school is a factory that uses children as raw materials and produces educated workers as a product, right?
Well, like it's like because like most schools don't cooperate with ICE because it's in the best interest of society that even an undocumented child still gets an education. And if you want that to happen, you can't cooperate with ICE. You can't have the child be thinking, if I go to school, are they going to call immigration on me? So the schools are just not going to be doing that work because it's bad for society to do that. Like, it's morally bad, and it hurts what the function of a school is.
Right? Yeah, no, it results in a less productive society. But and, how much resources do schools have? I mean, I guess cooperating with ICE is probably not very resource intensive, but still, in general. I need more seduction so I can get you to go around an alleyway with me for free.
You might have a student who you suspect might be undocumented. You're not going to say anything. You're not going to even do enough research to find out because it's bad. But so in a public school he can do that. He could probably even do that. He can do that in a private school if the Vampire Society is pretty well off. He's got some sort of stipend. So He's going to schools he's going to high school because he needs a peer group. He wants social interaction. This is the only place he can get it. He's also probably running into the fact, like, Fitz Edwards, who's like 100 years old, he's probably running into the fact that he's becoming more and more ensconced in childhood as what a child has grown. So maybe when he was first turned, he could essentially be in adult society, be like, well, I learned a trade. I started learning a trade when I was 13. I've been doing this for 3 years. That's not long, but that's long enough for me to be doing this.
So yeah, he might not be a veteran, but he is a professional in 1900.
In 1900, but it's now 2020 or even 2005. A 16-year-old cannot be in adult society at all. So he's probably got some frustration from adultness is every year is getting further and further outside of his grasp. Pretty much no matter whether he was wealthy or poor when he was turned, at this point, like, a lot of his peers live lives that are beyond his wildest imagination in terms of wealth and like leisure time. Like, even if he was like a noble, like, or an aristocrat or like somebody who was rich, he's probably like shorter than average and probably seems relatively malnourished. Like,
yeah,
like weight average is hit like a low in like the 1800s, like because of how malnourished people were because of industrialization messing things up. And like there was a period of time in like the mid to late 1800s where the average age a girl would get her first period was 18 because of how malnourished everyone in society was. Like, now it's like 8 or 9. There was a time where it was 18, and that was like because of how malnourished everyone was. So even if he was well off, he probably is relatively scrawny compared to everybody. Then he runs into the fact that, like,
that's also around the era when literature from this era, you're reading books from this era, people seem to faint from shock all the time. That's not an affectation of like literature of the era that was perfectly true to life.
Everyone is malnourished.
Yeah, everyone was malnourished enough that fainting from shock was a thing that happened when you got startled real bad, because you were already half faint from hunger all the time.
He's increasingly out of touch with society, and you into the fact that teenagers are the most ephemerally involved in pop culture. Teenage culture cycles so much faster than the rest of culture. And if he was turned in 1900, what he grew up on was nostalgic to these kids' great-grandparents. He is so out of touch at this point, and it's getting harder and harder for him to stay in touch culturally. And you run into the fact that, like, because one thing you could, because he's probably having a hard time staying, like, socially with it and staying popular, even in a group of teenagers, one thing he could do is, like, use whatever vampire powers he has, but there is probably some sort of masquerade. And because he's so scrawny, him using them is going to be more obvious. He can't join the football team and become the star football player, star quarterback, because everybody's seen this kid's arms. They know he's not throwing, oh God, I'm going to make a sports reference, and I'm like... I
not
want to say touchdown, but I don't think that's correct.
That was the joke I was about to make. Yeah, he's not going to be throwing any touchdowns, and only partly because you can't throw those. I guess you could throw it to someone who's in the end zone and get a touchdown that way.
He's not making these, like, 75-yard passes because he's clearly, like, 5'5" and 100 pounds. It would be a masquerade violation for him to be suddenly good at sports. So even though he's trying to get the social interaction from the group of teenagers, he has a pretty hard time doing so because he was born in 1910 and nothing makes sense to him anymore. So probably why the reason Bella equivalent is even into him is because she's weird and he's kind of weird and an outcast. He is legitimately an outcast, and she's legitimately an outcast. So that's where that spark comes from. And we're about to have another ghoul. We also can get into the thing that increasingly these relationships are meaningless to him because they're taking up an increasingly smaller portion of his life. Like, when you're a teenager,
just so we can get this before it goes away, what pose am I in right now? What am I standing on? Am I standing on the chair while feeding her? It's not hard to get my wrist to her mouth level. What am I... Animations in this game are fairly janky. But please go on.
It was 2005. But at this point, he's approaching 100 years old. That's a year is a tiny fraction of his life. It's like in The Fellow of the Dark, in that there was the vampire love triangle in that. One of the vampire teenagers is 400 years old, and one is like 60. And I'm like, you would choose the one who is 60. The one who is 60 might meaningfully still... in your relationship, like, it might mean something to him, because also the one who was 60 still, like, wanted to be human and sort of still seemed like he wanted to still just be a teenager. The one who was 400 was well integrated into vampire society. So I'm like, the one who was 400, your relationship with him does not mean anything to him. The one who is 60, your relationship with him might actually mean something to him. So he's getting to the point where your pseudo Edward is getting to the point where, like, he's questioning whether these relationships even mean anything to him without turning somebody into a vampire.
Right.
But then that's a decision he has to make in a split second in his time frame. Because, like, just a couple years it becomes weird.
Just gonna casually read a book right here in someone else's office. And yeah, like... Oh my god. I did not expect to be able to hack this with 2 points.
And I think that's probably, and the part of the appeal of your pseudo Edward is he probably actually has a lot of money, and he lives in a giant house that the vampire conspiracy rents for him. He has access to like materially whatever he wants, but it's all meaningless. Like he can't actually like buy what he wants, because what he wants is sort of these social interactions that are getting harder and harder for him to have. And that's probably like part of the, because like he's this amazingly rich kid who suddenly has an interest in your pseudo Bella, and she's gonna look away from the fact that he's super weird. He's got this giant house that is weirdly empty. There's not any photos of family. It seems like he's the only person who lives here, but he is able to buy pretty much whatever he wants. So it's simultaneously like, here's the appeal of your rich vampire boyfriend, but there's also a level of creepiness that you can add into that I think makes it more interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And there is, like, at some point you have to wonder how much of Twilight being bad is because the audience wants it to be bad. At which point, is it even really bad? Like, do they want that creepiness? And if they don't, then isn't the book better if it doesn't have that? Like, I like that better. I that gives it some... Oh, God. This isn't good.
Oh, boy.
I need to manage my blood better. Yep, we're losing humanity from that. That guy's just going to go back to bed. I mean, I guess that works.
And isn't he a quest giver?
Nope. He was important to a quest that I've already finished. It's fine. He's part of the goal quest. And honestly, I'm pretty sure if I walk in there and stare at his corpse, if the game knows what it's doing, that should be, like, valid as far as, like, yeah, this guy's not going to help Heather.
I mean, true, but also it's 2005.
Yeah, so, like, it might just glitch on that anyway. Okay.
So, your pseudo Edward, but I also think you do want to bring, I think part of the appeal of the vampire, the depressed demon nightmare boy is an element of danger. So
you need some element of danger for sure. Like, I don't know.
Supernatural danger.
I don't know.
She's got to be aware that he is dangerous. I think part of the dangerousness from him is an epiphenomenon of the fact that he is a vampire teenager. He's a little fast and loose with the masquerade, with all the rules, with his vampire powers in a way that is both physically dangerous, like maybe he's like a little reckless in like stuff like being in a car or something, like driving too fast, but he also might be reckless in a way that at some point the conspiracy might decide that they're done with this charity case and we're just going to stake him and anybody who knows about him.
Yeah, I mean, that gives a real element of danger. He is part of a wealthy and powerful society, but a wealthy and powerful society that might at any moment decide that they're done with him and they're going to kill him.
Because he's ultimately a charity case. Ultimately, at some point, somebody vamped a teenager, and he's kind of a danger to the masquerade, but they feel bad because it was not his fault, and they currently do have the resources to make it so he probably doesn't break the masquerade, but he's still a teenager, so he is pushing at these rules constantly, as teenagers do.
Right.
But at some point, they might decide, well, he's had 100 years, we've done enough, let's just end this. And that can even be... Like, I think the end game for this Twilight revision is your pseudo Bella chooses not to enter that. Like, she's had her 1 year romance and it was fun, but she's not going to become a vampire. And, like, potentially he reaches a point where he... Like, I would like part of me wants a little bit of catharsis for him, that he is able to reach a point, some sort of situation that is better than the situation he is in. Though I don't know that is doable, and you could just end with the implication is that eventually he is going to get himself killed for a masquerade violation. Because I don't know off the top of my head, like, what the sort of cathartic solution for him would be. That's been something that would...
If you're going to have that be the thing where, like, he is just a tragedy who isn't going to... who can't be saved, then I feel like you should have that happen on page. He should just, he should actually bite it during the course of the story at some point.
Yeah, because I'm not sure what the solution to the situation he is in would be. Like, and it's honestly only going to get worse the way I have set it up, which is a perfectly reasonable ending.
And there is, though, in the genre of romance widely written, everyone always gets a happily ever after.
Yeah.
So, I feel like that's its importance to paranormal romance. Finally, morphine. But yeah, I feel like for a paranormal romance, it has to work out somehow. Like, you have to figure out some kind of solution, which the obvious and easy thing to do is just turn him human again. There is some method of doing that. And there is sort of the problem there, which is that, like, this is a solution that just immediately makes him less interesting. Right? Like, you have solved the problem by... You have solved the problem by making Edward no longer an interesting a vampire. He's no longer a vampire boyfriend, but the story is over, so we don't have to care necessarily.
Here's what I'm thinking potentially. I do think this story does not end with Bella and Edward together, but I do think there is a restorative ending for Edward, which is maybe Bella convinces Vampire Society, you need to do something better for him. Just sort of pushing him off on high school and having him switch high school every 4 years is not acceptable. You got to integrate him into society somehow. And, like, yeah, he's 16 and he's always going to be 16, but there is a certain level of responsibility and integration into your society that he can have still. You've just kind of been shoving him off on his own for 100 years, and that's not really workable.
Do you not need anyone murdered ever? It seems like something a 16-year-old would be perfectly capable of.
I think that is the restorative solution, is he gets the Vampire Society that has been sort of foisting him off on mortals for 100 years finally accepts that he is their child, and even though he is going to be that way forever, like, he's 16, he can be dealt with, he can have responsibilities and be part of their society to a greater degree than they have allowed up to this point. I think that is the restorative solution for Edward.
The main thing, though, is that, like, with the happily ever after, Bella must end up with someone. Like, I
know that's the trope, but, like, we're not necessarily doing the paranormal romance. We're doing a fix of Twilight to make it better. It doesn't have to hit that exactly.
I guess that's fair. I mean, it still kind of feels like, creativity is born from constraints, and this feels like a relevant constraint, and that ignoring it is kind of cheating, but I don't feel like it is always a perfectly valid response to these kinds of constraints. On the other hand, so
I think, like, he gets to be a vampire assassin is the best outcome for him. The best outcome for Bella is she does not become part of Vampire Society, and they have this brief romance, and maybe he comes visits her on her deathbed, and he watches her die, and they talk about it, and it's a sort of Peter Pan thing where she got to live and grow up, and he got to be integrated into Vampire Society. They both did get a happy ending. She got that brief period of adventure when she was a teenager that I think a lot of teenagers want, and then she got to go on and have an adult life. So there is a happily ever after, and she had the romance.
You have to ask.
But it doesn't end up with her turning into a vampire and being in the same kind of shitty situation that he is in.
Right.
And it's not complete wish fulfillment. Like, I think that would be a good arc for your fixed Twilight characters.
Like, I think it definitely works as a story. Like, yeah, my only real concern is that, okay, but is this appealing to Twilight's audience? Even, if we assume that Twilight's audience is perfectly capable of consuming good literature, right? They'll take Twilight if it's the best that's available, which for the paranormal romance it was, at the time. If there was anything better, then nobody knew about it.
Well, I think this audience is okay with tragic romances. Like, think about The Phantom of the Opera. That is like the proto Twilight, and that does not end with Christine and the Phantom having a relationship, at least until until Love Never Dies. But we don't talk about that.
We would have preferred if that had never. I say we. I'm not actually part of that fandom, but we, as in just society in general, would have preferred if it had never ended with Christine getting with the Phantom.
Like I think that's the same audience. It's the same. I think you can have a tragic romance. And that might take it out of paranormal romance, but not being a specific genre is never a fault of a book. It's fine if you want to have strict rules for genre. That's okay, but that's not a fault of any story. Not fitting genre tropes does not make a story bad.
It's true. It doesn't make a story bad. The only reason why I bring it up is because it might make the story less appealing to the demographic the original story was. And I kind of feel bad. I don't want to come across as yeah, fuck the Twilight audience. Their opinions don't matter. I don't want to take that approach. People were not wrong to like Twilight.
I think this audience is okay with a tragic romance.
I think they might be
romances.
I mean, I could see that, but I could also. There's a way to figure out this password without cracking it, but let me see if I can.
Well, think about Titanic or West Side Story or Brokeback Mountain, or honestly, some of Nicholas Sparks' stuff. One of them, it's one of the characters has Alzheimer's. That's relatively tragic, and that's the same audience. Or Tristan and Isolde, they did that sort of more aimed at teenage girls version, and it still is the tragedy of Tristan and Isolde. I do think this audience is okay with it. And I do think the best way to give them a non-tragic version is what I described, where they had this romance, and they both ended up at a good place afterwards.
Yeah. And in fairness, I'm not super familiar with this audience. I would find it kind of hilarious if the teenage audience this is not what I was looking for. But I would find it kind of hilarious if the teenage audience was more okay and interested in this than the adult romance audience, where it is an iron law that every story must have a happily ever after, or the audience doesn't want it. Just because that would suggest that the teenage girls are actually considerably more mature and looking for more depth in their literature than the adult women, which this would tickle me. Teenagers generally don't get enough credit.
Don't. Some of the books aimed at teenagers, they'll try to hold they'll hold the reader's hand in a way that I don't think is necessary.
Buddy, I'm doing my best not to kill you. You should probably cooperate with me.
You might have to kill him.
Well, I definitely need to get some blood out of him, that's for sure. Luckily, he's got a lot of blood in his body, because that's definitely a variable thing with humans.
Is he still shooting at you?
He is. Holy hell, that is a lot. It is weirdly not a masquerade violation for me to just, like, walk away from him while he's shooting me. Like, I've apparently got enough soak that I don't really have to care about his pea shooter. So I'm just, like, ignoring the bullets.
This is the weirdest thing that has ever happened to this police officer. This woman just walked around ignoring me shooting at her.
Okay. I need to be able to hack this. Which means I need more XP. Which means I'm going to have to come back here later. Fine. I haven't done this in a while, and I've forgotten the optimal order in which to do these things. Which, you know, for character creation, I sunk a lot of effort into refamiliarizing myself with that before we started. I didn't do that for the Santa Monica area. I just made a couple of brief notes, mostly as were relevant to character creation. And, you know, it was like, what skills do I need from the word go? And then, for the rest, there's a bunch of XP available in Santa Monica. I'll pick it all up later. Which I will, but... Oh, let's go talk to Mercurio, see if I can give him his money now. I don't know if I actually have enough, but...
If you want to play Twilight fairly straight...
Nah, I spent his money.
And basically do what it was, you just make it set in college. Like, I think that's the solution there. And then you can do this, basically do Twilight. And
well, and
I
do think that having Edward be more dangerous would be a flat improvement. Like,
but it needs to be vampire dangerous, not abusive boyfriend dangerous.
Yeah. Like, if you wanted to improve Edward, I do think that making vampire dangerous much less cuddly, so that, you know, Edward is dangerous by virtue of being a part of it. I do think having Edward, rather than just, you know, talk all the time about how, oh, I could snap and kill someone at any moment, there should be a scene where he starts drinking from Bella, like, on pure instinct, and is then able to pull himself away before he drains her dry. But, like, she actually loses blood to him. Stuff like that.
Probably shouldn't sparkle.
Yeah, definitely not that. The sunlight needs to do something to him, because it's a vampire thing, and it's, you know, cool and broody. It's also...
I mean, a college student being pretty nocturnal is pretty believable.
Right. And there's also... I don't think it should be set in Forks' backwoods, which is not good for a vampire story. That's a werewolf territory.
Yeah.
Like, vampires belong in big cities where there's a nightlife that they can go out and be a part of.
I guess you just move it to Seattle.
Yeah, that would work fine.
Isn't that where the new Bloodlines is going to be set?
I haven't really been paying attention to it because, you know, I'm not super eager to find out how the Camarilla and the Anarchs are getting on. This game was just really well made, so, you know, I'm going to wait for that game to come out, and if it's good, then fantastic, but if it's not, then I don't care. I just want another good vampire RPG. I don't care exactly which setting it's in. Give me a fucking Coldest Girl in Cold Town RPG. I'll play that.
Holly Black, if you're listening.
I meant to accept that quest.
If you want to do Twilight fairly straight, you can't put it in high school, I think is the main takeaway. It being in high school changes what it needs to be. So I think having it be like college students, have Edward be more vampire dangerous, less abusive boyfriend dangerous.
Yeah, like... And, I don't think the audience is specifically looking for an abusive boyfriend. I'm not quite that cynical. Maybe that's me being naive. Like, I'm pretty sure the audience just likes danger. And, making Edward supernaturally dangerous would be, if anything, more engaging for them.
Also would move away from the weird moral themes of Twilight, if it's like quasi Mormon propaganda.
It's the one thing, the thing that I got out of Twilight more than anything else is that this is someone who has absolutely no experience, which is not true for most Mormons, by the way. Most Mormons acquire through osmosis an understanding of how other people date. Stephenie Meyer does not appear to have done this. Is that she has no understanding of... Is this?
I do always feel
Where the hell is Santa Monica
bad,
Suites?
attributing weirdness in books written by Mormons, just going automatically going, oh, this is because they were a Mormon. Because ultimately, I don't know any enough about Mormonism to point at any element of a book and say, oh, this is from Mormonism.
Generally speaking, there's not a lot. Like, most Mormon authors have enough contact with the outside world. They're not Amish. But for Stephenie Meyer in particular, I just think she's super sheltered. She has no experience with courtship out of the very rigidly defined practices encouraged. It's not even by LDS doctrine per se, but just by Utah culture. And
well, because I think Orson Scott Card, the conservatism in Orson Scott Card stuff could easily be the product of any Christian conservative. There's nothing specifically Mormon about it.
Right. Brandon Sanderson, you can definitely feel him learning how swear words work in some of his early writing, but other than that, there's nothing that. Yeah, I do think it is that Stephenie Meyer is just particularly sheltered and myopic, unconcerned with the experiences of other people to the point where she doesn't pick up on them. Which means she has absolutely no idea of the reason why she gets into bizarre grooming and abusive boyfriends and stuff is because she doesn't know how dating works outside of the Mormon paradigm. So when she writes something outside of that paradigm, A, it picks up a bunch of Mormon traits, but then B, it also gets really dark in ways that she doesn't understand, because she doesn't understand how courtship works outside of this very rigid paradigm where consent is built into the rigidity.
What is the Mormon paradigm, though, for dating?
I mean, it's not some kind of bizarre ritual or anything. It's just every element of it is, except for the temple marriage, which is a bizarre ritual. But
so there is a bizarre ritual involved.
Yeah. And even then, it's not that much weirder than a regular marriage or anything. Mainly, it's just that only Mormons in good standing are allowed to attend. Because it is in the temple, which is a sacred place for Mormons only. It's basically every stage, every action involved is like a normal American courtship thing. It's just there is an exact progression, not super exact. Again, don't imagine this is some kind of dystopia. Mormons are regular human beings. But there is a fairly fixed progression of when you do what and at what stage something is or isn't allowed. And it's also something else I'll point out. I'm really worried, this is a weird thing about Mormon culture, but I'm worried about getting exaggerated. People interpreting it as considerably more strange than it is. And again, it's a thing that's specifically in the culture of people who are Mormon and live west of the Rockies in the United States. It's a regional thing. It's not a doctrine. I would not expect Mormons in, I don't know, Europe or Africa or wherever to be doing this kind of thing. But there are, you're not supposed to date anyone until you're 16. You're allowed to go to dances there, but you are not supposed to be specifically committed to any specific boyfriend or girlfriend until you're at least 16. Anything more amorous than like perhaps a particularly intimate hug is like deeply frowned upon, if not expressly forbidden, until you are at minimum in college and probably until you're married. Sex before marriage is of course right out, but that's just American Christianity. You know, you're supposed to, when you are in high school at least, I don't know if this holds for college because at some point I no longer had any Mormon friends and no longer had to care. But in high school, you are, when dancing with your boyfriend or girlfriend, if you're 16 and allowed to even have one, you're not supposed to be more or closer than a foot to them, which is hilariously often judged by saying you should be able to fit a Book of Mormon, held flat in between you. This is real.
But I mean, so far all this sounds like something that could be true of like conservative Protestants.
Yeah, like I wouldn't be surprised to hear if evangelicals had very similar shit going on. I would expect them to have, I would expect the exact rules and customs to vary a little bit, but I would expect they would have the same basic stuff.
What do we have here?
I do feel like generally, like,
I'm just here for the side quest.
and in general, I feel like evangelicals tend to talk the talk and then not walk the walk a lot compared to Mormons. Like, I can imagine, like, evangelicals paying a lot of lip service to this and then not actually doing it. But other than that, like, it doesn't seem that weird.
The whole world tries to make me smile, and everyone always wants to know who is that girl. I am Jeanette, and this bit of chaos crammed in a certifiable giggle is my club. I just love to give you funny feelings all night, sweetheart, but I really
Jeanette is not nearly as sexy as this game wants me to think she is.
Yeah, she kind of turned into, like, the mascot of the game, despite being relatively minor.
Like, I'm going to pretend I'm into her because there are options in the climax I don't want to close myself out of if she doesn't like you. But, yeah. She's not very interesting. Oh, hey, fun fact. Most people have probably figured out at some point playing this game that you can dance in the clubs. But if you sit here and dance for 5 minutes, yes, really, it will give you a point of humanity. You can do that once per club. Yeah, we may do that off screen at some point if we get into a pinch humanity-wise. Are you the quest guy? I think he's the guy who gives me the quest. Yeah, I know you. So yeah, this guy is another ghoul. There's a bunch of ghouls in Santa Monica. They don't come up nearly as often after this.
They forgot about that plot point.
Well, I think it was just ghouls are sort of lower down on the vampire hierarchy, right? Naturally.
And you start going up the hierarchy.
So yeah, once you start getting, yeah. It's like having a bunch of ghouls lying around Santa Monica. It means that there are a bunch of people who are sort of like not quite on your level, which sort of immediately gives you that sort of vampiric feeling of power, of being elevated above society. There are these people who know the hierarchy the food chain extends past regular humans, and who are sort of between humans and vampires on it.
None of the male characters in this they all have this weird, like, their eyes are too close together thing. Like, none of them seem like they would be, like, attractive. Like, I realize it's 2005 video game, but even by 2005 video games, all the guys are kind of weird looking compared to the girls. Like, admittedly, I don't know whether any of these girls are registering as attractive, but all the guys have this weird look to them that I cannot explain.
I mean, like, I am informed that for the segment of the male population who are basic bitches, there are girls in this game, or the straight male, I should clarify, because that's the conversation we're having, like, literally right now.
Yeah, we're just two straight guys talking about women.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. But yeah, so for there is, that half, maybe 2/3 of the straight male population who are, anything vaguely woman shaped in a bikini will do it for him. And so, this game is getting that done for sure. But, yeah, so this is the guy who tells us what ghouls even are. He's like the fourth ghoul we've met, but... yeah. This guy in particular is like, he's supposed to be kind of bug-eyed, like he's high on crack all the time. So, I think the Uncanny Valley works for him, but yeah.
All of them have something with their facial features where it's off, and I think it's like specifically their eyes are too close together.
Yeah, and none of the women are especially cute either. Like, Bertram Tongue did not deserve this guy as a ghoul. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of women who are extremely and overtly sexually charged, but basically zero of them are, and some of them even have really good voice actors, which is, an important part of it, but they're, and I mean, this is, I could see this working really well, which is that they all have sort of extremely aggressive, threatening personalities in one way or another, which, I mean, most of them are vampires, that makes sense. But the game really expects me to be attracted to them anyway, which, like, even as a 17, 18-year-old, this level of predatory aggression, and it's not like sexual predatory aggression, it's just like, they're clearly, they're fighting a war kind of a thing. And, they're a shadow war with assassins and subterfuge, and they're having fun with it. And yeah, even as like a 17, 18-year-old, it was transparently obvious, even to my lizard brain, that this kind of woman wants me as a pawn, not a companion. And I'm not into that. Like, I'm sure that's somebody's fetish, but... I anticipate that, yeah, most of the people who find these women really attractive either have that specific fetish, or else, anyone with big boobs and a belly shirt was going to do it for them. No matter how fucked up the personality was. And yeah, like, it works for what it is, right? Like, these women are all vampires, but there's a couple of them where it's like, I want them to drop the facade and put a jacket on. We both know they don't actually want to fuck me. They want someone dead, so get dressed and let's talk business. Which is not to say, like, I want to be clear here, I'm not opposed to women being scantily clad. Like, if that's what she wants to wear, then fine. I do not get the vibe from any... Except Jeanette, but, I mean, she's unhinged. I do not get the vibe from any of the women who dress scanty in this that they want to. I get the impression that they're doing it because it gives them an advantage. Because, again, they're vampires. They're ruthless and calculating, and that makes sense for their character. I'm not paying enough attention to this conversation. I keep lingering on options. See, I wanted to save this whole thing for the next episode, but I don't think I can actually get a whole lot of side quests done without going a little bit further in the main plot, so we're doing that instead.
All right. None of the girls have really done anything for me, even though I am very heterosexual. Viewer, you might not know this, but Chamomile in his tabletop business, he keeps a ranking list of his players from most to least heterosexual, and I have ranked number 1 every single time. Right, Chamomile?
Yeah, no, you're definitely ranked over the guy who, upon seeing in the Dark of Hot Springs Island, if anyone is familiar with that, there is the image, which I definitely can't put on screen because YouTube won't like it. But it is an image of a ruined statue of an elf who has one exposed breast in a very, this culture doesn't always cover their breasts, it's not a big deal kind of way. Nevertheless, upon seeing this image, this particular player immediately declared that he was going to mate with the statue. And I would say, yeah, Requiem is definitely, like, above that guy. That guy's number 2, for sure.
Yeah.
Only one way to find out. Some point, it's going to be a while, but at some point we're going to get to Chinatown. And we'll have to talk about the Kuei Jin.
The whole, we haven't really gotten into the issues with any of the individual clans. There's a whole thing to go along with the Kuei Jin and everything wrong with that.
Yeah. There is a... It doesn't even come through a whole lot. Like, Bloodlines is generally fine with it. They took the good parts of Vampire the Masquerade, and there are a lot of good parts of Vampire the Masquerade. But, there are a lot of bad parts, too, which, as we come into the bits that are sort of tangentially associated with them that do make it into this game, we'll get to talk about that. And the Kuei Jin, who are a bad part of Vampire the Masquerade, did make it in. So, some things did slip through into Bloodlines, but...
Yeah. I assume the Ravnos at no point show up, right?
They do not.
It's been a while. That's good.
Yeah, the only non-Camarilla clans that show up, we do get...
The Giovanni and
whoever has vicissitude, I forget.
Yeah, there's some unpronounceable name.
Simichi, I think?
Simichi.
Yeah.
Simichi and the Giovanni both show up.
We call them the Camarilla clans, but the Sabbat, who are not the Camarilla, show up regularly in this game, and they use default player models for Camarilla clans, which fits my impression of the setting, which, there's not a whole lot of source material to draw on, because Vampire the Masquerade's main products are RPGs, which don't, have a plot line unto themselves, really, whether or not the writers always understand that. But I got the impression that, some 60-70% of the Sabbat are actually quote-unquote Camarilla clans, like Tremere, the wizards that we are, although usually the ones that show up in the Sabbat are Bruja, Gangrel, and, the kinds of guys who show up in the Anarchs all the time. It's also, the Anarchs and the Sabbat are, the same thing, except that the Sabbat are dumber, and the Anarchs are playable.
The Sabbat have their mustaches to twirl.
Yeah.
I guess since the Ravnos don't show up in the game, we could talk about the Ravnos briefly and how bad they are.
Let's go for it.
Because we talked about Dracula last episode.
Well,
and Dracula, for some reason,
let's preface this by saying I don't even know if people who've played Bloodlines are going to know this. Obviously, it's a pretty basic bit of lore. So yeah, I'm retreading a little bit for people who know Vampire the Masquerade. But in Vampire the Masquerade, there are supposed to be 13 clans, right? Each of which is a bloodline descended from one of 13 excruciatingly ancient antediluvian progenitors. So exactly who gets to be on the list of 13 varies, because there are more than 13 good ideas for vampires, at least at the level of quality that Vampire the Masquerade is operating on. There are some real duds in the list, which we'll get into. But yeah, so there is a sort of canonical list of 13, although there's not totally agreed upon list of 13 because, some people prefer to replace one of them with one of the ones that ultimately got cut. But, yeah, that is what a clan is, which is not something the game has so much explained. So, just wanted to grab that in case anyone is coming in from this not knowing how Vampire the Masquerade works, beyond the fact that it's about vampires.
Right.
And I took way too much time explaining that, but this is what happens when I explain things off the top of my head. So, the Ravnos, let's go ahead and get into that. That is one of the vampire clans. They are not part of the Camarilla or the Sabbat. They do not appear in this game for very good reasons.
Thank goodness. So, we've talked about the source material for World of Darkness, and part of the problem is that they kind of limited themselves to... They limited themselves to basically like Dracula and a couple of movies and Interview with the Vampire. And so they're trying to hit like 13 clans, and they're kind of taking from too narrow of a source material. So in Dracula, for whatever reason, and I guess the reason is racism, Dracula, like all the Roma in Transylvania just sort of like automatically follow him. And that became like a weird horror movie trope that Roma people were always like in the movie for whatever reason and were frequently villains or had like weird magical powers. So for Empire of the Masquerade, they had a clan that was the Ravnos, who are just Roma people, and they have like thieving powers, which is a stereotype of Roma people. They also don't say Roma, and when they talk about the clan, they use the slur because
of course they do.
Because of course they do. There's also the thing that like the ethnogenesis of the Roma is like the 1300s. That's when the Roma leave India and start showing up in Europe. Ethnicity has not existed way back to ancient times, and yet they have this ancient progenitor. It's like having an ancient clan of vampires who's Americans. It kind of is weird. It's also just like taking the stereotype of Roma people and pinning your whole clan about it and making the whole point of the Ravnos is that they're Roma vampires, and it's like, yikes.
Yeah, I mean, none of the ethnic vampire clans were a good idea, just on the basis that none of the Camarilla clans, the core 7 clans that show up a lot, they're generally agreed to be pretty good, or, at the very least, like, not all of them are, strictly speaking, good ideas for mechanical reasons, or, like, some of them break down on careful examination, some of them do bad things to your games in ways that aren't obvious at the outset, but every one of the core 7 Camarilla clans, there's someone out there who sees it and says, I want to play that. Even if for the Gangrel, it's mostly people who wish that werewolves were playable in vampire games, but they're not.
I don't know anyone like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, they never did release that mummy vampire thing. No, I lied. They did, but it was shit. But yeah, no, they do have a splat book where you can play a mummy vampire in Vampire the Masquerade, so, you're covered.
Yeah. But as you were saying, they're
morgue. I need to go to the morgue.
The Camarilla are relatively good ideas.
Yeah, they're pretty good ideas. But then, with the expansion clans, they came up with the 7 first, and then they said, like original first edition Vampire the Masquerade, the book was, here's the 7 Camarilla clans, and then they came out with the others later on in splat books. And the canonical list of 13 eventually got solidified in later editions. So by the end of the 90s, there was like a canonical list of 13, which included things like the Giovanni, who are in this game, and who are all Italian necromancers. It's like, hang on.
And they're
why
Italian stereotypes.
Yeah, but
endless Italian stereotypes.
The Tremere have no particular ethnicity. The Bruja, the Malkavians, the Gangrel, they have no particular ethnicity. Why are the Giovanni Italian mobster necromancers? And there's a bunch of them like this. The Children of Set, I think they're called. The Setites. They are Arab, Egyptian stereotypes.
It's the Asamites who were the Arab Egyptians.
Asamites? Okay.
The Children of Set are Satanists.
Okay. I always get those two confused.
The Asamites are a bunch of Muslim stereotypes.
Okay, yeah. And then we have the Ravnos, who are the Roma stereotypes. And all of these ethnic ones, I mean, even the Italian ones, it's not like Italians are particularly discriminated against in our society right now.
Still
although,
uncomfortable.
but it's still like, it still feels like you're being a dick to them for no reason. Like,
it still feels super gross.
yeah, like, you might not be, like, this is not a path that's going to lead to anyone getting murdered. But, like, I feel like we can do better than that. I feel like this book will at no stage take someone on a path that ends in murder. Like, I think we can aim higher than that.
Like, it makes sense to have your vampires have certain, like, geographic origins, and it makes sense to take, like, vampire archetypes from specific, like, cultures, but there's no reason to then tie that, have them, like, have powers that are, like, based on stereotypes of that culture.
Yeah,
Like,
a necromancer clan of vampires is not a terrible idea. And saying that the first necromancer vampire clan, their progenitor, was an Italian guy, sure. But you should still expect to see, like, you know, a Brazilian necromancer vampire sometimes, or whatever.
yeah,
Just,
and the clans should not be, even if they have specific ethnic origins, they should not be ethnically bound.
yeah, no, they should be a necromancer
Because that
clan,
doesn't
right?
make sense for how vampires work.
Yeah. The morgue. I need to get into the morgue. I'm getting so into this conversation that I'm just wandering around blindly in this game. I hope it's not annoying to watch. And if it is annoying, if you are screaming at me to get to the quest already, then I sympathize. I apologize.
I mean, there are plenty of Let's Plays that do that. I
It's
imagine
true.
if you're watching this Let's Play, you're in it for the conversation, presumably.
It's true, but I could also see that they might, like, someone might be in it for both. You know, they want to see the game played. They also want to hear what is hopefully interesting or, you know, perhaps hilariously stupid, whatever. So long as it's engaging, I guess it's all the same. Conversation at the same time. You know, it feels like playing a game with your friends a little bit. That's why I watch Let's Plays. And so,
Like,
yeah.
like,
I'm
so,
going to try to stay on task a little bit more, just in case there is someone who's feels like there's a little bit too much conversation and not enough actually getting the game done. And we can't have both.
Like,
I just need to focus.
so, like, let's say you want a new vampire clan. So let's say you're going to do spider vampires, because that makes sense. So having a, like, real-world monster that you can pin this to is usually a good idea, rather than trying, because especially you run into the thing where coined words can be really hit or miss, because you can easily end up with something. You can end up with something like interesting, like Ventru, but then you can end up with something like Velstrak, which is just how dare you.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, you
and,
could,
like,
as a random example, as like a comedically exaggerated example of something so dumb that surely no one would ever do it, or if they did, it definitely wouldn't end up as part of like a popular vampire touchstone that actually sort of, you know, defines the genre for a significant subculture or anything. But imagine if you had a clan of like punk rock bruiser vampires, right, who are really good in a fight. And imagine if you named them after the Spanish word for witch, which is bruja, and then you pronounce it bruja. Like, just as a hypothetical example of a sort of a ridiculously bad thing, but you could imagine how something like that could happen. Just you know, that's the Onion article version of the. Obviously, it would never be that stupid, but as sort of a less exaggerated version would be plausible, though.
Yeah, but that would never happen in real life. So you're going to do a spider vampire. In Japan, they've got a lot of spider monsters who are kind of vampiric. They've got all sorts of sorcery powers. They can look like humans and, like, do the vampire conspiracy. So you go, okay, my spider vampires are Zorogumo, and they originally come from Japan. But you're going to want to then say, but they've spread out from Japan since then. Japan has been open to the world for centuries, and maybe not centuries. I'm actually not sure when the opening of Japan happened.
2 centuries.
Japan's been open for a while, and it's not like they're.
But yeah, it's a.
Like, and so you have.
I mean,
so you
it's
have
a
spider
quote unquote
vampires.
fun story, which is American gunboats, and this is where the term gunboat diplomacy comes from. If you've ever heard of that, it's kind of fallen out of favor, but it's a fun phrase. We should bring it back. Yeah, American gunboats sailed up to Japan. They would quite like Japanese markets to be open, and they made this known by firing cannonballs at Japanese fortresses, which were using cannons so out of date that they lacked the range to retaliate. And so after a couple of hours of bombardment, they were like, okay, well, I guess we have to concede because we literally can't fight back.
So,
And that was in the
so you
1850s.
have
So yeah.
your spider vampires. They originated in Japan, and so there's Orogumo. And when you give them powers, you're going to give them spider powers. You don't need to give them like tea ceremony powers or katana powers. You just give them spider powers. I mean, you write about like what is a Orogumo stereotypically like. You think about what like a spider vampire would be stereotypically like. So probably like manipulative, subtle. You don't go, well, what are Japanese people stereotypically like?
Right.
You're not like, well, Zurgum are like polite and industrious. You're like, no, don't do that.
Yeah, no.
And you always
They're-
make clear that stereotypes are stereotypes. They're not enforced. They're not universally true.
Right. That's just... Okay, you are a boss, which means we are busting out the big boy. So yeah, I am just going to use the ability that gives me more health than it drains. More blood than it drains, rather.
We're about to be dead.
Yeah, no, this guy is a little bit more serious than I was prepared for. But I don't know, we'll see if I can make it work. Alright, I've got enough blood to spam the vomit power on him now. There you are, buddy. You're not feeling so well, are you? Which, this guy, by the way, is Kuei Jin. He is one of the Asian vampires. We'll be getting way more into them later, so we should probably talk about them later. But
Yeah.
if you find
They
his
kind of
accent
hit exactly
insulting,
what I just,
yeah, if you find his accent
kind of-
insulting, don't worry, it will get worse.
yeah, they kind of hit exactly what I talked about not doing with the Jorogumo.
Right. Where did you go? There you are. You should go see a doctor about that. That looks painful. Alright, I should probably harvest some more blood from you, because I can do that.
Just in general with the clans, they needed to be drawing from a broader source material than they did. They are kind of limited in the vampire source material.
Yeah, too many of the clans are just Dracula.
Well, they're not even full Dracula. They're just like somebody sliced off a piece of Dracula.
Yeah.
Like the Ventru are pretty much Dracula.
I mean, the Toreadors are not Dracula. They're a little bit more Lost Boys, but
I would think the Toreador is more interview, but interview
Yeah.
vampires are already pretty similar. Are pretty similar to Dracula anyway.
right. Like, if
They're
you
not
told me
that
Dracula
different.
was a Toreador, then I would say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can see that, right? Like,
Gangrel have aspects of Dracula.
yeah, Gangrel are like the only ones who can turn into bats, so they get that from Dracula.
Like, too many of these are just Dracula. There's more vampire archetypes to draw from, and they kind of are way too limited. Also, you get the thing where I don't think whatever you pin your vampire clan on, it can't just be like a behavior. It needs to be more than that. So having your seductive vampires and your spy vampires and your ruler vampires isn't a good idea. Like, if you
Yeah.
have vampires who are stereotypically seductive, it should be like because they have powers that are good for seduction. You have
Right.
vampires who are
Which
stereotypically
the Toreador
spies.
do not. The Toreador have no powers that are particularly good for seduction. They are just the sexy vampires. They have a lot of physically oriented things, so they're actually great combatants. But that's just because, they're elegant, and so they get celerity, which, it makes sense. I can see a sexy vampire having super speed. That is a thematically coherent concept, but that's not actually what the incentives do, right? Like,
Yeah.
the Toreador aren't actually incentivized to be seductive. They are incentivized to be assassins, basically.
Yeah.
Uh,
The only ones that, like, the Nosferatu legitimately have spy powers. So
right.
them being stereotypically spies makes sense. It's not the direction I would go with Nosferatu, but we can get into that when we actually run into Nosferatu.
Which we will
But,
soon. We're going to run into Bertram Tongue, not this episode, but next episode.
like, so kind of, like, they've pinned... And, like, even just a role is not enough to pin your vampire down. You need a little bit more of a hook for it to be interesting. Like,
I think the Nosferatu, like...
Nosferatu have a whole hook, but, like, the Ventru and the Toreador and the Bruja...
Yeah, that's
even
fair.
Even the Gangrel don't really have a hook. They're just vampires with a certain role.
I think the Bruja, they aren't usually portrayed this way, but I think there's an obvious way to go with them, which is that they can be the punk vampires, and that would work fine.
I think you would need a little more than that. Because I think that's what they're trying to be, but, like, I think you need a little more than that for a hook. And again, punk is a behavior. It's a style. And a vampire needs more than that to be a clan.
Well, they have the whole punk thing, and then they also, because Vampire the Masquerade features heavily the war between young and old vampires, I think having the Bruja be opposed to that, to that very premise.
Well, I don't think you should be able to say something like that.
It's true, that does get into...
That's an organization.
It's true.
That's you should be able to say of a clan.
Not really the Bruja, that's the Anarchs. So that's fair.
The Anarchs. Punk vampire is you've got an organization that your punk vampires of all sorts of vampire bloodlines go to. But that's not a specific bloodline. And if you have a bloodline that's stereotypically punks, there needs to be a reason. Like, maybe they have, like, sabotage powers or fire powers, or even if they, like, have madness powers, they just make everybody a little loose and crazy. Those could all lead to being stereotypically punks.
Where's the blood doll in this place?
But...
Is that you? You look kind of like a blood doll.
That guy in the GIMP outfit as well.
I mean, I just need to top off on blood. I really don't care what they look like. I'm pretty sure if they're moving around, that makes them an unlikely candidate. Maybe you? Oh, hey, what about you? You have a speech option.
Not in this lifetime. If you were the last person on Earth, I'd reconsider my views on bestiality.
Ouch.
Look.
My boyfriend will be back any minute.
Oh, I don't have, like, any seduction, do I? I need more. I mean, this is a good bit of RPG design, is that, like, the choices that I make in character creation are making a difference. Like... my character is weird and eerie. This, was sort of a shy nerd in the first place, and is now a weird, eerie vampire. Actually, I think that character concept, like, works really well with the level that the facial animation this game works on, where, she has this...
President of the chess club.
Yeah, like she has this slightly too intense look, but, like, it really works for the idea of, like, she's not seductive, she's way too intense to be seductive. Like...
She was president of Model United Nations in high school, and she will start talking to you about the internal politics of Uruguay for an hour if you let her. She knows so much about Uruguay. She kept being like, I want to be on the Security Council, and they would never let her be on the Security Council. What's your seduction? 1.
Yeah, it completely bottomed out. Now, I will at some point, I'll probably start points in subterfuge or appearance, but appearance is super expensive, so we're not going to do that. Right now, though, I need points in computer so I can hack a thing. Let's actually see if I can hack that thing right now. Just gonna go back upstairs and harass that cop some more.
Like, oh god, she's back.
Nope. No one here but us chickens. Yep. That was an accident. Where can I get with this place? I forget. Can I?
He can hear you crawling around in the fence, and he's just pretending like you can't.
Oh, there's just another way of accessing the... This isn't it? Well. That wasn't intentional. I just...
You probably heard that. He's just really pretending like not to hear you.
Yeah, there's not even a way to crawl up there. Oh well. It makes sense that my character can't crawl up there, but is there a way for other characters to? Because I feel like there should be. Oh no, because then I can come out here and open up these. Okay, that's what that is for. Doctor will be here any minute, buddy. Don't worry. It's gonna be okay.
Is that the doctor you killed?
Shh.